They froze as the boardroom doors burst open. The man they had kicked out of seat 1A 3 days earlier walked in, straight-backed his eyes cold as steel. "I'm Evan Brooks, and as of this morning, Meridian Air belongs to me." The air exploded inside every chest. On the 32nd floor of Meridian Air's glass headquarters in downtown Seattle, the rain outside fell in thin silver threads over the bay. Inside the ceiling, lights were icy white. The LED board flickered with red and green numbers. Richard Camden, the current CEO, hesitated for a split second, his hand still holding the fountain pen, mid-stroke like a syringe frozen in a chart. He couldn't believe his ears. There was no way that a passenger in a hoodie, the one Mark had called a nuisance, had now claimed the throne he had occupied for 10 years. Mark Halverson, the customer service manager, swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust. Becky Lowe, the chief flight attendant, set down her paper cup too quickly, her palms damp with sweat, her eyes darting across the wall like a bird searching for a way out. Evan didn't need a chair. He stood, letting every blink in the room fall upon him. His charcoal suit framed his athletic build, his tie knotted tight like a line, holding emotion in check. In his mind, fragments of sound returned from that rainy night in Chicago. The voice that said, "Step down," the grip of a security guard's hand on his elbow, the cold snicker of the man in the next seat, Bradley Keaton. The memories no longer hurt. They were sharp, clear, and pointed forward. He drew a slow breath. The air smelled of oak-warm photocopiers, and tension dissolving into oxygen. "You're meeting about a hostile takeover," Evan said evenly, his voice like a steel ruler. "It's not hostile anymore. I hold 51.2%, and I'm here to end an era." Camden tried to smile. He had weathered financial storms, signed contracts big enough to change the sky. He straightened, forcing the gentle tone of a father figure. "Mr. Brooks, there must be some misunderstanding. We can certainly—" "There's no misunderstanding." Evan cut him off. He raised his hand. The door opened. Angela Park, the newly appointed compliance lawyer, entered with 2 assistants carrying documents, the temporary appointment papers, and suspension notices pending board confirmation. The sound of leather folders hitting the wood table was dry and final. That sound made Becky flinch. She remembered leaning toward the passenger in first class that morning, asking him to lower his voice. She had believed it was just standard procedure. Now the truth stood before her, undeniable. Mark tried to salvage his words. "Sir, we were only following priority protocol for Platinum members to make people like you move." Evan repeated his exact words, slicing each syllable, his gaze locked on Mark. He tapped a remote. The screen at the end of the room flickered to life. A shaky video appeared, the frame trembling in the hands of whoever had recorded it. The speakers boomed with Mark's voice, sharp and commanding. "Sir, please move to the back seat, or we'll have to ask you to leave the plane." Then came Becky's half laugh, half smile. "Thank you for your cooperation." And in the corner of the frame, Bradley Keaton's smirk lips, curved eyes bored. The whole room seemed to shrink. Wind and rain pressed against the glass, and Seattle blurred into gray steel. Shame rose like fire in Becky's throat. She saw herself on the screen, the thin smile, the polite nod. A year ago, she had been proud of her perfect customer satisfaction score. Now every score felt like a stone, paving the road that had led her to this cliff. Camden stared at Evan, trying to read. His intent was this punishment or demolition. He knew the balance was fragile. A struggling airline, a new shareholder needing market stability, and media pressure that could break stock prices in half a day. "We'll conduct an internal review," he said, clinging to the old corporate line. "There will be retraining. No more." "No," Evan replied. His voice was clipped and final. "Effective immediately. Richard Camden, you are suspended from all executive duties. Mark Halverson and Becky Lowe, your contracts are terminated and referred to compliance for investigation of specific violations. All refund and complaint procedures from the last 5 years will be reopened under third-party supervision." His sentences were short, firm, each one striking like a rivet, fastening the body of a shaking plane. Angela handed over the papers. Mark stepped back. He couldn't believe that 20 years of service had ended with a 2-minute video. But the weight pressing down on his shoulders wasn't the video. It was the choices he had made over and over, the reflex to judge skin before service, to bow to the word platinum, to raise walls at the sight of a hoodie. Evan felt no satisfaction. In his eyes burned not vengeance but discipline. He turned to the rain tracing silver streaks down Seattle's glass skyline. For a fleeting moment, his heart tightened with a single deep note. What would his mother say if she saw him now? The woman who once hugged her son in a cramped apartment and told him, "Dignity isn't something you wear. It's something you keep." He wasn't keeping it just for himself anymore. He was keeping it for everyone who had ever been pushed to the margins. "You think this is about seat 1? Evan said quietly, his tone low and weighted. "But it's bigger than a seat. It's about how you decide who deserves to sit. And today, that way ends." The door opened softly. Sophia Price, an investigative journalist, appeared outside with her camera crew. No one had invited her, Evan had. Camden moved to object, but Evan raised a hand. "Transparency," he said simply. One word, and the room changed color. The remaining board members and department heads sat straighter, facing the mirror they had long avoided. Angela began outlining the 90-day plan review. Complaint data, enforce mandatory bias training, publish equity performance metrics by customer group, establish a compensation fund. Her voice was steady and precise. Each timeline anchored the company like a mooring line in a storm. Becky suddenly spoke, her voice small and trembling. "I was just following procedure." Evan turned toward her, meeting her breaking gaze. Behind her eyes, he saw the long flights, the jet-lagged nights, the cold KPI charts, but also the easy nods of compliance, the small acts that together built the system itself. "Procedure," he said softly, "is what we write, and starting today, I'll be the one writing it." Lightning split the sky, a muted boom rolling behind the glass. The pace quickened. Signatures, seals, access badges, deactivated internal emails, firing like silent fireworks. Familiar names fell from the company chart like autumn leaves. But in Evan's chest, the storm wasn't destruction, it was rebirth. He hadn't come to bury a company, he had come to rebuild it. Before leaving, he looked at Sophia. "You'll ask why I bought an entire airline. Because of one flight," he said, pausing so the room could hear the rain and their own breathing. It wasn't for one flight, it was for every flight taken by those who were never seen. His eyes swept the room, stopping at the rain-streaked window, where Seattle still breathed and moved. If you choose to stay, be ready to work by one simple rule. Dignity first, profit follows, and then both will rise. Camden was silent. In his mind, numbers calls, lawyers and investors crashed together, but deeper inside a voice he had long ignored, whispered, "Have I chosen the easy road for too long?" Mark lowered his head. Becky stared at her hands, realizing that the small habits she thought harmless had become invisible wounds across thousands of passengers. Evan closed the remote, turning off the screen. "This meeting is over," he said. "The new story begins." He walked into the hallway, heavy with the scent of rain. There, beneath the long stretch of glass, his footsteps echoed, steady, firm, certain. And above him, hanging in the silence like a cold star, lingered one question. What happened on that flight? What could have been powerful enough to push a man from the seat beside the lavatory to the chairman's seat of an airline and turn personal humiliation into a manifesto for change? We'll return to the beginning at the departure gate in Chicago, where it all began. The automatic doors at Chicago O'Hare slid open, cold wind spilling in with the smell of coffee and the metallic clatter of hundreds of suitcases. Evan Brooks tugged the hood of his black hoodie a little lower. After 3 days of non-stop meetings with an investment fund in New York, he wanted nothing more than to get back to Seattle, take a long shower, and sleep. A 46-year-old CEO, after more than 20 years building Horizon Dynamics into a $12 billion tech empire, was dreaming of one simple thing: a real night's sleep. In front of Meridian Air's first-class check-in counter, he stood still holding an e-ticket worth $5,000 paid with the company card. Harsh white light struck the glass, reflecting a tired face. Hoodie jeans, worn-down sneakers, that unassuming look made him seem like a regular engineer, not a man who had spoken at the World Economic Forum. Behind the counter, Becky Lowe, the first-class agent, looked up. "Ticket and identification, sir." Her voice was flat, and even her eyes resting on him for a second before sliding away. Evan smiled politely and handed over his documents. He saw the change almost at once. A flicker of hesitation, a suspicion not even hidden. Becky looked at the ID, then at him. Again and again. "Is there a problem?" he asked gently. She didn't answer. She turned away, lifted the phone, and murmured, "Yes, I have a case that needs verification. First class. No, not a regular." "Yes, I'll hold him." Evan drew a slow breath. He knew that pattern. He had seen it before. 4 men in suits lined up behind him, the even tap of polished shoes, the scent of expensive cologne. Becky returned his documents with a smile so thin it was cold. "Please wait a moment. There seems to be a small payment error." An error. Yes, it looks like the system hasn't confirmed the transaction. My company card was charged $5,000. "I understand, but you can sit down while we verify further." He said nothing. The line behind him began to murmur. White passengers walked through the priority lane, scanned a code on their phones, and were waved into the lounge. No one asked them whether the payment was real. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Finally, a man in a deep navy uniform approached Mark Halverson, customer service manager. "Hello, Mr. Brooks," he said, voice smooth, half polite, half wary. "I hear there's been a little hiccup." "No hiccup at all," Evan answered, "except for your staff's attitude." Mark pressed a tight smile. "Likely just a small misunderstanding. I apologize, but our procedure requires us to recheck large transactions." Evan added nothing. He simply opened his phone and held out the bank confirmation on the screen. $5,000 Meridian Air First Class paid. Mark glanced at it and said softly, "Yes, but if you could be patient, this is an internal matter. We'll arrange another seat in the meantime." "No other seat. I have seat 1A. We'll take care of it. Please cooperate." The words, "please cooperate," fell like a stone. Evan nodded without reacting. He knew if he argued now, they would say, "disruptive passenger." When the speaker announced boarding, he was still standing there, and then Becky returned, wearing a practiced smile. "We've completed verification. You may board now seat 1A by the window." Inside first class, soft amber light glowed on brown leather seats. Evan sat and exhaled. 3 rows, 12 passengers. An odd, luxurious hush. He opened his laptop and fired off a few emails to the finance team. Before he could close it, a man's voice sounded behind him. "Excuse me, I think you're in the wrong seat." Evan looked up. Facing him stood Bradley Keaton, a middle-aged man in an expensive grey suit, his collar as stiff as a nameplate of power. "Seat 1A is mine," Bradley declared, not even glancing at his own ticket. "No, it's mine," Evan replied, holding up his boarding pass. Bradley lifted his brows and looked for Becky, who was serving nearby. "Stephanie, Becky, we've got a problem. He's in the wrong seat." Becky stepped over, gave both men a quick look, then turned to Bradley. "I'm sorry, sir. There seems to be a small mix-up." "Let me check." Evan held out his ticket. "Clear as day seat. 1A. Becky studied it, frowned, and said softly, "Mr. Keaton, your seat is 1B. Bradley scowled. "No, I always sit by the window. I'm platinum." Becky forced a smile. "I understand. But today, no buts." He cut her off, lowering his voice, just enough for the row to hear. "I don't want to sit next to someone not suitable." Not suitable. 2 words as blunt as a blade. Becky was silent for a beat. Then instead of objecting, she turned to Evan. "Sir, could you switch to 1B to help us out just for service convenience?" He looked at her calm. "I chose 1A when I booked. I want to stay in my seat." Becky pressed her lips together and turned away to call on the radio. 5 minutes later, Mark Halverson entered the cabin, his earlier courtesy gone. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "loading the name with warning you're disrupting boarding. We ask that you cooperate and move." "On what grounds?" Evan asked. "We have the right to arrange suitable seating for frequent passengers." "You mean suitable for skin color?" Evan asked, plainly. Mark stalled. "No, of course not. It's just a convenience matter." "Convenient for whom? For everyone." His voice dropped, and a phone camera clicked on. "I'm recording for transparency." Mark's brow tightened. "You're not permitted to record on the aircraft. The law doesn't forbid me from documenting discrimination." In the 3 seconds of silence that followed, Evan felt every gaze in the cabin settle on him. Some curious, some cold, a few sympathetic. Mark turned to 2 flight attendants. "Remove him from the aircraft. He's causing a disturbance." Evan remained seated, voice even. "I haven't raised my voice. I just want to keep the seat I paid for." 2 security officers appeared. One placed a hand on his shoulder. "Please come with us, sir." Evan stood without resistance. As he moved down the narrow aisle, he heard Bradley Keaton's low but clear murmur. "Thank you. You know, they always think they're special. That they cut like a knife." He walked slowly past the rows, past the cold stairs. When the cabin door closed behind him, the small click sounded like a full stop at the end of his faith in fairness. 7 minutes later, he sat in the last row by the lavatory, next to a brown-haired woman with a kind face. She tilted her head and whispered, "I saw everything. They shouldn't have done that." "I'm used to it," Evan said, weary. "My name is Sophia. I'm a journalist. If you're willing, I'd like to hear that story." Evan turned to the tiny window where raindrops ran in long streaks. "Maybe," he said. "But first I need to make a few calls." As the plane lifted off the cabin, lights dimmed. Up front, the people who had just pushed him out of seat 1A were raising glasses of champagne. In the last row, he opened his phone and typed 3 lines to his executive team. "I just got a lesson. It's time we invest outside our sector into aviation. Prepare everything on Meridian Air. I want to own it." The screen went dark. Inside him, the humiliation no longer burned. Hot, it cooled and hardened into a cold resolve. The plane shuddered lightly, as if signaling what was about to come. Evan closed his eyes. No one in that cabin knew that the man in the last row had just set in motion a plan that would shake the entire American airline industry. The engines hummed softly outside the cabin, a cool blue glow pulsing on the ceiling like one enormous heartbeat. Evan sat still, eyes on the small window. Below Chicago sank into a bank of grey cloud while he drifted toward a fight he had not yet defined. Beside him, Sophia Price, a young reporter from the magazine Civic Lens, slipped off her headphones and asked quietly, "Are you all right?" Evan turned with a faint smile. "All right in what sense?" she faltered. "I just mean, what happened was awful. I do investigative features on discrimination inside corporations, and honestly, I've never seen it so unmasked." He studied her and his gaze softened. "Did you get it recorded?" "I did not film, but I remember every word. I know the manager's name, Mark Halverson, and the flight attendant, Becky Lowe. I can run them through public HR databases." Evan did not answer. He simply opened his phone and connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi. The signal was weak, but enough to reach a few internal sites. 15 years at the top of tech had taught him one rule: all data leaves a trail. And the systems that seem strongest often crack the moment one person is determined to peel back the first layer. He typed Meridian Air discrimination cases. The results loaded slowly, each line piercing like a thorn. Passenger alleges downgrade without explanation. Black couple questioned about ticket authenticity. Asian executive detained for random screening after boarding. The same pattern, the same response, no evidence found, not one case acknowledged, not one apology. A chill ran up his neck as he drew a breath. He opened a new note and tapped bullet points. Collect 5 years of customer feedback data. Identify senior personnel over the customer loyalty division. Check principal shareholder ties for possible circular investments. Sophia leaned to look. "What are you doing?" "Gathering evidence." "To Sue, no. I do not have time for court. I want to rebuild how they operate." His voice was low, but every word landed with certainty. Sophia watched him, curiosity mixing with respect. "What field are you in, Horizon Dynamics? Technology, data, and responsibility." "Responsibility? Yes. The thing too many forget when power convinces them they stand above others." A light shudder rippled through the plane. A passing flight attendant cut Evan a glance, tinged with disdain, the familiar look he had faced 100 times, yet never accepted. Sophia saw it and shook her head. "Do you know Meridian Air is under a quiet probe by the Department of Transportation? For what? For profiling passengers by customer value scores. They deny it, of course, but my source says the directives came from the CEO, Richard Camden." Evan leaned back. He had just seen that name in last year's interview, the man who said that cultural diversity only makes processes messy. He murmured, "Good. I prefer to start at the top." Sophia smiled. "You sound like someone who does not fear the system." "I do not, because I know how to run it." For a moment, the engine noise seemed to fade. The world narrowed to 2 people, a journalist chasing truth and a CEO pursuing justice in his own way. 3 hours later, the plane touched down in Seattle. Evan switched off airplane mode and a flood of messages arrived the Horizon Dynamics leadership team had been working throughout his flight. A text from Caleb Morgan, the CFO. Quick report after the Westfield deal, we have about $3 billion in cash. Anything wrong? Boss Evan typed back, I want Meridian Air's data. Shareholder structure, current debt and financing partners. As fast as possible. The reply came in under 5 minutes. Understood. You planning to go big again, duh? I just want to teach someone how to fly at the right altitude. He let out a short laugh. His anger was no longer burning, it had cooled into glass, clear and cold. Outside the window, Seattle was pouring rain. Droplets struck the fuselage in a rhythm like an urgent drum line. Evan caught his reflection in the glass, a man stripped of a seat, about to take the entire ship. That night, he reached his penthouse on the 48th floor, overlooking Elliott Bay. The apartment lit itself with quiet automation. No one waited for him, except his team's emails. He opened his laptop and launched a video call. 3 familiar faces popped in sequence: Caleb Morgan, the CFO Angela Park, the General Counsel, and Maya Patel, the head of investments. It's late, Evan. What's urgent? Maya asked. Meridian Air. Evan said straight to the point. I want a full brief. Caleb brought up slides. Charts filled the screen. Debt piled high. The stock sliding for 18 months, training budgets cut again and again. They are running on fumes, Caleb said. Without a capital injection, they will be insolvent within a year. Excellent, Evan answered. Who is the largest shareholder? Camden Holdings 38%. The rest is scattered across smaller funds. Anyone ready to sell? There is a group looking to exit 25%. They want a quiet buyer, nothing public. Evan's voice dropped. We will be that buyer. Angela frowned. Through the parent company. No, through 26 subsidiaries. Each takes a small slice. No one notices. By the time they do, it is too late. The virtual room fell silent. Only the rain remained. Maya spoke softly. You are turning an insult into a takeover. Evan looked straight into the camera. No. I am turning injustice into reform. Angela was careful. Why do we need to get involved at all? You could cut a video trigger, a media firestorm. And then what? They apologize, send a voucher, and it all fades, he cut in. I refuse to be the pitied victim. I want them to do the work right for good. The 3 studied him. In the blue wash of the screen, Evan's face was stark, weary, and lit by a fierce conviction. What do we call it then? Caleb asked. Evan smiled. Operation Accountability. Near dawn, Seattle slept to the sound of waves under the piers. Evan stood at the window looking down. Below, Meridian Air trucks still moved cargo staff, still wore the same uniforms he had seen, the same colors, the same cold quiet. His phone buzzed. A message from Sophia Price. I reached someone named Derek Vaughan, former HR director at Meridian Air. He was fired for opposing discriminatory policies. Do you want to meet? He replied, tomorrow morning, and bring every document he has. He sent the text and drew the curtains. The rain kept falling. Inside him, outrage was hardening into a clean blueprint, step by step, person by person, share by share. Meridian Air had dragged him out of seat 1A for the color of his skin. Now he would make the entire airline stand up and relearn how to treat human beings. Outside, lightning flashed. The brief flare lit his face. He was no longer the humiliated passenger. He was the man with the sky's fate in his hands. Morning in Seattle was wrapped in a cold silver haze. Rain fell lightly over Elliott Bay, shimmering like 1,000 shattered mirrors. On the 48th floor of the Four Seasons Hotel, Evan Brooks sat by the window, a cup of black coffee in hand. He hadn't slept all night. In his mind, the pieces of his plan aligned like a three-dimensional model, shares cash flow, cross-ownership structures, each fitting perfectly into a picture he called Operation Accountability. The phone rang. Caleb Morgan's voice, sharp and steady, came through the speaker. "I've confirmed it. Glenmark Capital is trying to sell 25% of Meridian Air's shares. If we move through a few shell companies, we can buy them quietly, without revealing our identity." Evan closed his eyes briefly. "Good. Start immediately. I want 26 subsidiaries involved, each holding less than 2%. Caleb hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Are you planning for Horizon Dynamics to be the final holder or no?" Evan replied, "This isn't a business deal. This is an ethical test for an entire industry." After hanging up, he turned back to the table. A thick folder weighted Meridian Air's financial records litigation history, and one particular email sent by Sophia Price the night before. The subject line was brief: "Meeting with Derek Vaughan, former HR director at Meridian Air. He has internal evidence." The cafe sat deep in the Fremont district by the river. Derek was already there, mid-40s, graying hair, an old wool coat frayed at the sleeves. His face carried the weary look of someone who had endured more than he cared to admit. When Evan approached, Derek stood eyes guarded, but hopeful. "You're the man Sophia mentioned," Evan nodded, sitting across from him. "I want to understand what happened inside Meridian." Derek glanced around and lowered his voice. "Are you sure you want to dig that deep? They're not easy enemies." Evan smiled faintly, eyes steady. "I'm not playing their game. I'm changing it." A quiet pause followed. Then Derek opened his briefcase and placed several thick bundles tied with rubber bands on the table. Internal emails, statistics, handwritten notes from closed-door meetings. "This is everything I kept. I tried to take it to CEO Richard Camden, but he said I was complicating things. 3 weeks later, I was terminated for lack of cooperation." Evan flipped open a page, his eyes scanning quickly. The report showed that 87% of complaints from passengers of color were dismissed without investigation. The loyalty priority policy favored passengers deemed on brand, a corporate euphemism for well-dressed white clientele. And one memo from Camden to the board read, "Don't waste money on diversity training. Our customers don't want moral lectures." Sophia, sitting beside them, turned on her recorder. "Can I use this data for my exposé?" Evan rested his hand on the folder, voice low but firm. "Not yet. I need it for something bigger. When the time comes, you'll have exclusive access." Sophia nodded, her eyes lighting up. "So what are you planning to do?" Evan looked out the rain-streaked window. "I'll buy the very system that created this discrimination and use ownership to rebuild it from the ground up." Derek froze. "You're serious? More serious than any investment I've ever made. You'll be going up against Richard Camden himself. He's deeply tied to finance and media circles." "Even better," Evan said coolly. "I don't want to destroy a company. I want to destroy the culture that lets one like it survive." That afternoon, Evan had a private meeting scheduled with Henry Caldwell, CEO of North Star Robotics, a partner company in merger talks. The meeting took place in a private dining room at the Fairmont Hotel. The space was intimate, paneled with cherrywood lit by soft golden light falling on the polished table. Red wine was already poured. Henry, a refined man in his early 50s, greeted him warmly. "Evan, before we talk merger, I have something interesting. Do you know Richard Camden, the CEO of Meridian Air?" Evan raised an eyebrow, only by reputation. "He's my brother-in-law," Henry said with a chuckle. "Quite a coincidence, isn't it? I just had dinner with him last week. Sounds like the airline's in real financial trouble looking for a strategic investor." Evan gripped his glass slightly tighter, a cold wave rippling down his spine. Fate was clearing the runway. "How bad, pretty dire," Henry said quietly. "Without at least 300 million within 3 months, they'll default. But Richard's clever. He only wants a silent investor, no interference in management." Evan set down his glass, his eyes gleaming. "And you think I'd be interested in aviation?" Henry laughed. "You're interested in anything that makes profit, aren't you?" Evan smiled faintly. "Profit isn't always the end goal." The answer made Henry pause, not realizing that in that moment, Evan already held the key. Meridian was weak, and he would buy it before they ever knew. Late that night, in his penthouse, Horizons leadership convened online once again. Caleb reported swiftly, "We've secured 40% of the target shares through intermediaries." No suspicion raised. Angela added, "I'm drafting legal cover to protect you from conflict of interest charges if this goes public." Maya cut in. "Evan, are you sure about this? ATEC CEO buying a sinking airline. People will say you've lost your mind." Evan stood and walked to the window. Rain slanted across the city, the lights below stretching like veins in a living body. "No, Maya. I haven't lost my mind. I'm just tired of watching people be treated as if they don't exist. If I have the power to correct it, I won't use it for myself. I'll use it to remind the system that human beings come first." The team was silent. Caleb spoke softly. "Then we move on your word." "Yes." Evan turned back, his eyes burning with purpose. "And remember, no one mentions my name until it's done." He ended the call and sat back. Outside, a distant ship horn echoed across the bay like confirmation. At dawn, the next morning, a message from Sophia appeared on his phone. "I found 3 more former flight attendants willing to talk. I've arranged the meetings. Will you join?" he replied. "Meet them all. I want every angle and I want them safe." Stepping onto the balcony, sea wind swept over him, carrying the scent of salt and rain. He knew there was no turning back. The flight from Chicago that had stripped him of his dignity had become the spark for a corporate revolution. And from this moment on, the game was no longer about reclaiming Seat 1A, but about reclaiming dignity for everyone who had ever been pushed out of the place they deserved. The first light of dawn glowed across the glass rooftops, casting a pale gold halo around his face. Seattle awakened, and with it, a plan began to take flight. Seattle's night was wrapped in deep blue. Outside, the drizzle fell softly, like 1,000 silent dots. Inside the penthouse on the 48th floor, the glow from the computer screen reflected off Evan Brooks's tense face. The clock read 11:57 at night. He took a slow breath and pressed Join Meeting. On the screen, 4 familiar faces appeared one by one. Caleb Morgan, the CFO, Angela Park, the General Counsel, Maya Patel, the Head of Investments, and Sophia Price, the only journalist granted permission to observe. Evan began, speaking, his voice low and resolute. "Thank you for being here. From this moment, Operation Accountability officially begins." The group was silent. In the dim light, each face seemed half swallowed by darkness, leaving only eyes bright with focus. Evan opened the first slide, a dense web of red arrows showing shell companies' capital flows and financial partners coded by symbols. "This isn't a financial deal," he said. "It's an ethical surgery. We're cutting open a system that's rotting and grafting it a new heart. Caleb spoke first. I've started acquiring shares through the Asterion Fund and 3 companies in the Cayman Islands. So far, we own about 23.6% of Meridian Air, and no one has noticed. But we must be cautious if the buying pace spikes. Their board will smell it. Evan nodded. I want 51% before CEO Camden can call an emergency meeting. The less the press knows, the better. Maya Patel leaned closer to her camera. Do you think we're going too far? A tech CEO buying an airline just to make a point, the media will tear you apart. Evan answered slowly. Maya, this isn't revenge. I don't want to burn a system down. I want to teach it how to fly without dropping humanity. There was something in his tone that silenced the room, a calm so deliberate it made people believe every storm had already been mapped. Angela Park closed her laptop halfway and looked at Evan through the screen. I reviewed all the files Derek Vaughan provided. They've been suppressing complaints, altering internal data, even sending private memos to staff on how to handle customers who don't match the brand image. We can use it as evidence if needed. Evan tilted his head slightly. Keep it sealed. Release it only once we control the company, Sophia asked. So you mean you'll buy them and then expose them yourself? Evan smiled faintly. No. I'll expose them, but from their own chairman's seat. The words cut through the air like a blade. Someone in the group took a sharp breath. Over the next 3 days, the operation moved quietly, like an underground current. Caleb coordinated trades through 26 small entities spread across 7 countries. Angela worked with a team of attorneys to legalize every money flow. Maya posed as the head of a fake investor consortium called Phoenix Holdings, negotiating discreetly with Meridian Air's outgoing shareholders. Each piece clicked into place. Meanwhile, Sophia Price and her team worked in parallel collecting testimonies from 15 current and former employees of Meridian Air. They described meetings where the word diversity was banned, where verbal orders said, make sure premium customers feel most comfortable, especially if they have to sit beside someone different. Sophia sent Evan an audio recording. The voice of Thomas Reynolds, Director of Customer Service, laughed coldly. Those people always think they're treated badly because of skin color. No, it's just because they don't fit our image. Evan listened silently, then saved the file under one name, evidence_01.wave. His face showed no anger, only the stillness of a man too familiar with injustice to be surprised by it anymore. On the 4th night, the second virtual meeting began. Caleb reported, we're at 47%, 4 more to go. But I just got word, CEO Camden has called an emergency meeting tomorrow. He suspects irregular stock activity. Evan didn't frown. He only asked, can we complete it within 12 hours? Difficult, Caleb said. But if we push through the Singapore channel, maybe. Do it. He turned to Sophia. Prepare your crew. I want you at Meridian Air headquarters by tomorrow afternoon. When they realize who's behind it, you'll have a story America will never forget. Sophia looked at him, part thrilled, part uneasy. You're sure they could sue you for market manipulation? Evan gave a small smile. If I can buy them legally, I don't need manipulation. Before dawn, 3:42 in the morning, Caleb's encrypted message arrived. Done. 51.3%. We officially control Meridian Air. Evan read it. His mind calm as still water. No cheers, no applause, just one quiet thought. Justice is no longer a dream, it's a duty. He picked up the phone and called Angela. Prepare the paperwork appointing me as executive chairman. At the same time, draft temporary suspension, notices for 3 people, Richard Camden, Thomas Reynolds and Becky Lowe. 2 this afternoon, I'll make the announcement." Angela hesitated for a heartbeat. "You're confronting them directly." "No," he said softly. "I'm putting them in the audience, so they know what it feels like to be pushed out of their own seat." That afternoon, Evan met Sophia in the lobby of the Fairmont Hotel. She carried her camera microphone and a face brimming with resolve. "Are you afraid?" she asked as they walked toward the car. Evan smiled. "Of course, but not of them. I'm afraid that if I stay silent, I'll become one of them." The car turned onto the boulevard leading downtown. On his phone, the morning financial news carried one short line: Meridian Air stock rises slightly after new investor enters. No one knew who the investor was. No one imagined that the person sat in the black sedan, gliding past glass towers, eyes set on reshaping an entire system. When they arrived, Evan stopped before Meridian Air's headquarters, a 40-story building crowned with a silver-winged logo gleaming under the sun. He looked up at it, as if facing the force that had once broken him. There was no hatred left in his gaze, only purpose. He murmured almost to himself, "3 days ago they dragged me out of seat 1A. Today I'll drag them down from the sky." Then he stepped inside, ready for the first confrontation with people who didn't yet know the company's true owner had changed. Behind him, Sophia Price quietly pressed record. Her camera followed his steady stride into the storm's center, capturing a man walking toward justice, ready to rewrite it with his own hand. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning to take flight under the name Operation Accountability. The rain had stopped, and Seattle welcomed the afternoon with a cold, metallic light. Wind swept in from the bay along 4th Avenue, snapping the flags in front of Meridian Air's headquarters. Inside the glass atrium, staff hurried back and forth, unaware that in a few minutes the company would change hands, and the history of the 3rd largest airline in the United States would veer onto a new course. The elevator climbed steadily to the 32nd floor where an emergency board meeting was underway. Evan Brooks stood in the car with his fingers laced, breath slow. Beside him, attorney Angela Park clutched the appointment papers, eyes sharp as ice. Behind them, Sophia Price and her film crew followed, close cameras set to silent record. When the doors opened, a receptionist glanced up and bowed slightly. Evan did not slow. He moved down the long corridor, laid with deep blue carpet light glinting off brass nameplates for each director. Every name, every seat of power each one had, helped build the system that pushed him out of seat 1A. Behind the large wooden doors, the meeting had begun. Current CEO Richard Camden stood at the digital board, voice heavy. In the past 72 hours, more than 47% of the company's stock has been purchased by unfamiliar entities. I suspect a hostile takeover attempt. Another voice cut in, Thomas Reynolds, the service director, who had ordered Evan off the flight. "We need to counter immediately. Issue more shares and rally loyal holders to increase their stakes." Camden nodded. "I have asked legal to verify. My team will contact the SEC." The doors swung open. All heads turned. Evan walked in, calm as if the room already belonged to him. "Apologies for being late," he said evenly. "I believe you are discussing me." The boardroom fell silent. Only the soft whisper of rain against the windows could be heard. Camden frowned. "Who are you? And who allowed you in here?" Evan set a folder on the table and slid it toward him. "My name is Evan Brooks, CEO of Horizon Dynamics. And according to these filings, I am the new controlling shareholder of Meridian Air." Camden snatched the papers and skimmed page after page. The color drained from his face. "That is impossible," he stammered. "We did not sell." "Your shareholders did," Evan replied, voice hard as steel. "I currently hold 51.3% through 26 intermediary entities. The transactions are complete lawful and were confirmed by the SEC this morning." Thomas Reynolds shot to his feet, face flushed. "Is this some kind of joke? You have no right." Angela Park stepped forward and set another stack of documents on the table. Under the company charter, a controlling shareholder may appoint an executive chairman on an interim basis until the next general meeting. Mr. Brooks signed that resolution 20 minutes ago. Evan turned to Thomas with a faint smile. "You are right. I had no right until this morning. Now I do." In the corner, Becky Lowe, the flight attendant from the fateful flight, sat with the customer service management team. When she recognized him, her face went pale. The coffee cup in her hand trembled. Camden forced a smile. "If you think that because of one minor incident you can buy an entire company to get revenge," Evan cut him off, firm and final. "This is not revenge. It is responsibility." He lifted a remote and played a video on the wall. Footage from the flight filled the screen. Evan being asked to switch seats, a brief argument, then being escorted away. Reynolds's sneer, Becky's thin smile, every detail flooded the room's hush. When the clip ended, Evan spoke slowly. "This is how Meridian Air treats its passengers. And I am not the only case." He pressed the next button. Slides appeared, charts, figures, internal emails, the evidence collected by Derek Vaughan. 87% of complaints from passengers of color dismissed without review. 62% disparity in compensation between white passengers and passengers of color. Everything was clear as daylight. Sophia filmed from the corner, panning across faces, some lowered, some stunned hands, shaking under the table. Evan looked around. "Who among you still believes this was a mere incident?" No one answered. Only Becky whispered, I was just following procedure." "And that procedure," Evan said, "is exactly why I am here." He turned to Camden. "You built a system that sorts people like luggage. Today that system ends." Camden snapped, "You do not understand aviation. We are simply keeping premium customers comfortable." Evan tilted his head with a small smile. "By humiliating others. That is business, Mr. Brooks." Evan's palm struck the table, his voice ringing. "No, that is prejudice made official." The room froze. His tone was not loud, but every word struck like metal. Then he lowered his voice, clear and measured. "I did not buy Meridian Air to destroy it. I bought it to repair it. Effective immediately, I appoint Angela Park as Chief Compliance Officer, with direct oversight of all complaint handling, hiring, and training. Every policy touching customers and employees will be reviewed." Thomas shouted, "You cannot do that." Evan turned back, gaze glacial. "I just did." He looked straight at Mark Halverson and Becky Lowe. "You two were directly involved in that incident and in falsified reports over the last 2 years. Effective now, you are suspended pending internal investigation. All access privileges are revoked immediately." Becky broke into tears. Thomas slammed the table, but security was already at the door. "You will regret this," he rasped. Evan answered, "I have already spent long enough regretting my silence." Camden rose, fighting to keep his poise. "I will speak to the shareholders. They will not let you ruin this company." Evan held his gaze. "I am not ruining it. I am curing it." He nodded to Sophia. She stepped forward, microphone live. "Mr. Brooks," she said in a reporter's cadence, "do you have a message for the public? This story will be nationwide within hours." Evan paused. He looked around and saw once proud eyes now weighted, saw Seattle's light reflecting on the floor like water. Then he said, "They dragged me from seat 1A because they believed I did not deserve it. No one has the right to decide who deserves respect. From today, Meridian Air will be the first airline to redefine luxury by human dignity." A deep silence settled. In the corner, Angela Park opened a folder and began handing out documents. "These are the official papers," she said. "You may sign or resign." Camden threw down his pen, his expression half fury, half defeat. Evan walked out without looking back. The door closed behind him, and the soft, persistent rain returned to the soundtrack of the hallway. Sophia caught up and asked quietly, "How does it feel?" He stopped. The hall lights put a glassy sheen in his eyes. "Like taking the right seat again," he said. "Only this time I am not sitting alone." Outside, a blade of lightning split the sky, and the city flashed for an instant, as if signaling the beginning of a new era. 3 days after the fateful meeting, the atmosphere inside Meridian Air's headquarters was completely different. The hallways that once echoed with the cold footsteps of authority were now alive with quiet conversations. The plaque reading CEO office had been removed, replaced with a new one, gleaming in the light Executive Chairman Evan Brooks. On the top floor, an internal live broadcast was being carefully prepared. Nearly 8,000 employees, from pilots and flight attendants to ground staff, had logged into the system. Giant screens at Seattle, Denver, and Atlanta airports simultaneously displayed the headline, "Reform Announcement, Evan Brooks, Executive Chairman of Meridian Air." Evan stood before the camera, not wearing a suit. He had chosen a white shirt, with his sleeves rolled up, his voice low, steady, and firm. "Hello, everyone. Over the past 3 days, you've probably heard the rumors. Today, I want to confirm that every one of them is true. I, Evan Brooks, have become the controlling shareholder of Meridian Air, and I am not here to cut costs nor to punish. I am here to rebuild the foundation." He paused, looking directly into the lens. "A week ago, I was asked to leave seat 1A. Not because of a technical issue, but because of prejudice. I did not get angry. I simply asked myself, how many others have silently left their seats the same way? How many customers, how many employees have been pushed aside just because they did not fit someone's idea of what is proper? Today, my answer is simple enough." Behind the scenes, Angela Park watched the live broadcast, lips pressed together, eyes filled with pride and concern. The way Evan spoke, gentle yet resolute, felt less like a speech and more like a declaration. Even those who once doubted him could not look away from the screen. From this day forward, Evan continued. Meridian Air will be rebuilt upon 3 principles: transparency, accountability, and respect. I call it the 90-day plan. Over the next 90 days, everything will change, not just in documents, but in the hearts of every person. He pressed a button on the remote, and the screen behind him lit up. One mandatory unconscious bias, training for every employee from pilots and flight attendants to senior leadership. To a full review of the past 5 years of ignored complaints, every case to be re-examined by an independent committee. 3 diverse hiring and promotion policies. No one will be excluded, based on race, gender, or background. 4 transparent customer data. Every satisfaction and feedback report will be published regularly, untouched, and unedited. 5 the creation of the Dignity Fund to compensate passengers who faced discrimination and to provide free legal assistance to victims. This is not a press release, he said, his voice softer. This is a promise. And this promise does not come from a CEO, but from a man who knows what it feels like to be dismissed. In the live chat window, thousands of messages began flooding in. Thank you, I've seen this happen every day. For the first time, I'm proud to say I work at Meridian. I hope this time we really change. But not everyone was ready to accept it. That afternoon, during a management meeting, tension filled the air. A grey-haired man rose to speak, Walter Simmons, the sales director, his tone heavy as a hammer. We are a business, not a social organization. Mr. Brooks, you may be a tech genius, but the airline industry doesn't run on moral lessons. It runs on profit. The room murmured in agreement. Evan smiled calmly and didn't argue. Instead, he took a financial newspaper from his pocket and opened it to the center page. Harvard Business Review. He read reports that companies with diverse workforces are 35% more profitable than average. He slid the paper toward Walter. That's not a moral lesson. That's business reality. Walter fell silent. Angela followed up. When we treat people fairly, we don't just keep customers, we keep trust. And trust, Mr. Simmons, is the only form of capital you can't buy. The room quieted. Evan looked around. If anyone feels that Meridian's new values don't align with their own, the door is always open. But if you stay, we will prove that dignity and profit can fly in the same direction. That evening, Evan returned to his office. Heavy rain veiled the city in silver. He gazed down at the taxis moving below, glowing like fireflies in the mist. A message popped up from Sophia Price. I've finished the investigation. 15 current and former employees are ready to testify. But are you sure you want me to publish it now? Evan replied. Not yet. Let them see. We're changing first. Then tell the story. He set the phone down and exhaled. On his desk, the interim report showed that in just 3 days, Meridian Air's stock had risen 7%, and social media was flooded with praise for his speech. A CNN journalist wrote, Evan Brooks is turning justice into a new business model. Angela entered, carrying a fresh folder. This is the list of reopened complaints. Some victims have asked to meet you. Evan nodded. I'll meet them all. No one deserves an apology by email. 2 weeks later, at Atlanta International Airport, one of the airline's main hubs, Evan personally attended the first training session. The room was filled with more than 200 flight attendants, pilots and ground staff. On stage, a training expert spoke about unconscious bias, the hidden judgments we act on without realizing. Evan sat in the front row, listening, taking notes. When the session ended, a young flight attendant approached him quietly. Sir, she said, I used to be mocked by co-workers for being Arab. Today, for the first time, I feel like the company actually cares. He smiled, taking her hand. Thank you for not giving up. You are the reason I'm doing this. Across the country, the media exploded. Some outlets called him the reformer who reinvented the airline industry. Others criticized him as the black CEO, turning business into politics. Camden's former shareholders threatened lawsuits. But Evan stood firm. At a press conference, he looked straight into the cameras. Fairness is not politics, he said. It is competence. 30 days later, the Redemption Track program was launched, allowing employees previously suspended for discriminatory conduct to return to work after completing community service and special training. I don't want mass firings, Evan said. I want transformation. On the 90th day, the first progress report was released. Discrimination complaints down 73%. Employee retention up 22%. Net quarterly profit increased by 11%. Meridian Air, once seen as a cold, conservative institution, was now hailed by Forbes as the comeback story of the decade. Evan stood on the rooftop of the headquarters, watching the crimson sunset spread across Seattle's sky. Angela approached and asked softly, "Do you regret choosing the hardest path?" Evan smiled, his eyes reflecting the fading light. If justice were easy, people wouldn't have to fly around the world to find it. He looked out at the horizon, where Meridian Air's planes climbed through white clouds. For the first time in years, he felt peace, not because he had won, but because real change had finally begun. 6 months after Evan Brooks took control, the skies over Seattle seemed clearer. Meridian Air's headquarters was no longer the cold monument of grey suits and empty handshakes. Now its walls were lined with a new slogan, "Dignity is our altitude." One early spring morning, Evan walked through the main lobby. Employees who once kept their heads down when passing executives now smiled and greeted him. A young flight attendant whispered to a colleague as he walked by, "He's really different, not like those CEOs who only exist on magazine covers." Evan overheard and turned back with a smile. That small gesture was enough to dissolve the invisible walls that had stood there for years. In the office of the Chief Compliance Officer, Angela Park reviewed the 26th report since the Redemption Track program began. Customer feedback is up 28%. Complaints related to discrimination are down 93%, she said over a call with Evan. But what I'm most proud of isn't the numbers. It's the people who once did wrong now helping teach the next generation. Evan smiled softly. They've come to understand. Angela nodded. Thomas Reynolds completed 600 hours of community service. He's now working with a non-profit that trains frontline workers on empathy. And Becky Lowe, she left aviation, but she's coordinating the Bridge Project training police officers on emotional awareness and bias recognition. Evan was silent for a few seconds, his eyes distant. I never wanted them to pay. I wanted them to restore what was right. Angela smiled and typed another line into her report. CEO confirms philosophy, not revenge, rebirth. Across the country, the media was still buzzing. CNN reported Meridian Air has become the model for a humane corporation. The Wall Street Journal ran the headline, "Evan Brooks, the man who turned humiliation into a billion-dollar reform." Meanwhile, conservative channels scoffed. He's turning an airline into a morality class. Evan didn't respond. He understood that when people aren't used to fairness, they call it excessive. But he also knew that truth has its own persuasion, and the numbers spoke for themselves. Second quarter revenue up 19%. Employee retention up 30%. Meridian's stock price had climbed more than 40% since he took charge. One afternoon, Evan sat in a meeting room with Sophia Price, now a highly sought-after journalist, after her documentary series, The Seat That Changed the Sky. Sophia opened her laptop and showed him a photo of Meridian employees standing hand in hand on the runway, forming a circle around a new airplane bearing the Dignity Air logo. "This is our latest media campaign," she said. "My feature story is being considered for a Pulitzer. But I have to ask, now that everything's going well, are you planning to step back?" Evan was quiet. He looked at the photo, at the faces, young and old, white, brown, and black standing together. The eyes that once carried doubt now glowed with pride. "No," he said slowly. "I didn't come to perform a miracle and disappear. I came to prove that change can last." A week later, in the company's main auditorium, Evan hosted the Meridian Transformation Report ceremony. Stage lights reflected off the wooden floor as over 200 investors, journalists, and employees gathered. Evan took the stage not with a speech, but with a video. A montage of the past 6 months, the first broadcast, the training sessions, the moments when employees embraced after receiving public apologies from the company. His voice resonated through the speakers. We once thought change required decades. But the truth is, it only needs one thing, someone brave enough to begin. The entire hall rose in applause. Sophia recorded the moment, knowing it was the perfect ending for the second chapter of her documentary, From Seat 1A to the Chairman's Desk, A Journey to Reclaim Dignity. That night, Evan drove home late. On the radio, the host read a letter sent to the newsroom. Dear Mr. Brooks, my 13-year-old son was humiliated on a Meridian flight last year when he was accused of stealing an iPad. This week, he received a letter of apology and a complimentary ticket with an invitation to tour your headquarters. When he saw you on the news, he said, "Mum, someone stood up for me. Stood. Thank you for giving my son faith that there are still good people in this world." The host's voice trembled. Evan gripped the steering wheel, warmth spreading through his chest. In that moment, he knew that no number, no report, no headline would ever mean more than this. 9 months later, at the Global Aviation Summit, Evan took the stage as the keynote speaker. The hall was packed. CEOs who once mocked him now sat in the front row. You ask me, he began, how someone who was once thrown out of Seat 1A could change the entire airline industry. The answer is simple. I didn't try to prove I was right. I just made them see what was wrong with the system they defended. He paused, scanning the room. We live in an age where technology can make us fly higher than ever, but only respect keeps us from falling. If fairness becomes a business strategy, the world won't just be richer, it will be more worth living in. The hall erupted in applause. 1 year to the day since Evan had been forced out of Seat 1 at Chicago O'Hare International Airport was bright with banners reading, "1-year anniversary of the Dignity Initiative." Evan stepped out of a black car alongside Gabrielle Winters, the new CEO he had appointed, to continue his philosophy. "You're really handing over all control?" she asked. Evan smiled. "I'm not leaving. I'm just clearing the runway. Now it's your turn to fly this plane farther." In the terminal, a small ceremony awaited. A shining brass plaque was draped in white cloth. When Gabrielle pulled the cloth away, the inscription gleamed beneath the lights, "The Brooks Initiative," a commitment to the dignity of every passenger. Applause filled the air. Evan looked around and saw old and new employees standing side by side. A flight attendant stepped forward, eyes glistening. "Sir, I've worked here for 12 years. Today is the first time I've ever been proud to wear this uniform." Evan placed a hand on her shoulder and said softly, "Thank you. It's people like you who keep the skies clean." As the newly branded Meridian plane took off, the evening sun poured gold over its metallic body, its reflection gleaming in Evan's eyes. 1 year ago, he had been forced from his seat by prejudice. 1 year later, he stood watching thousands sit where they truly belonged. Evan Brooks smiled. He hadn't just reclaimed Seat 1A for himself. He had reclaimed dignity for the entire sky. The early morning wind swept through the low buildings of Southside Chicago, carrying with it the scent of coffee and car exhaust. Evan Brooks stood before the newly built community center, now renamed the Brooks Foundation, for Equality and Leadership. The polished brass sign reflected the first light of day. Today, he had returned to the place where his difficult childhood began. The same streets, the same leaking roof, and the same wary looks he once endured simply because of his skin color. Inside the auditorium, hundreds of high school students sat in silence. Evan stepped onto the stage. There was no orchestra, no ceremony. Just him, a microphone, and a story. You know, he began his voice, calm and steady. A year ago, I was asked to leave a first-class seat. Not because of a mistake, but because they didn't believe I could afford that ticket. The room went still. But instead of suing, instead of getting angry, I chose to buy the very system that made me leave that seat. Because there's one lesson I learned early on: if you only react, you'll always be chasing injustice. But when you change the rules, injustice has to learn how to play by yours. A boy raised his hand. "Sir, what if I don't have billions of dollars like you?" Evan smiled. You don't need billions. You just need the courage to start with one small action, one timely word. Change doesn't begin with money. It begins with the belief that you can make a difference. Applause filled the room. Not polite applause, but the sound of hearts awakening. Evan bowed slightly, his eyes bright. He knew that a seed had just been planted in the same place where he'd once been told that dreams were a luxury. Leaving the center, Evan stopped by a small cafe on the corner, the place where it had all begun. A scene made him pause. A middle-aged black man was being questioned by a young barista for not paying his bill. Evan watched for a moment, then stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I just saw him pay by card before you walked over." The young employee stammered, embarrassed, and apologized. Evan didn't scold. He sat down beside them and spoke softly. "This is why we have to learn to think before we judge. One wrong assumption can leave someone carrying a scar for life." As he left the cafe, the owner called out, "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I'll have my staff retrained on customer conduct." Evan smiled. That's enough. Change doesn't have to start in boardrooms. It can begin right here in a small cafe. That evening, he sat alone by the window of his apartment, gazing at the city. Above, the lights of Meridian airplanes crossed the night sky, leaving long trails like lines of memory. A message appeared from Angela. "The board has approved the expansion of the Dignity Initiative internationally. Next month we begin in London." Evan typed back, "Good. Justice should never stop at borders." He set his phone down and leaned back in his chair. In 1 year, he had traveled the full distance from humiliation to pride, from one stolen seat to millions of seats restored to those who deserved them. Outside, the night sky mirrored the city lights below, an ocean of new hopes. Evan Brooks whispered softly, "The world doesn't need more winners. It needs more people who dare to stand up." He smiled and closed his eyes. The sky was still vast, and justice, like every airplane, can only soar when it carries the dignity of humankind. On a peaceful morning, Evan Brooks stood by the window of his new office at Meridian Global, gazing out at a horizon bathed in golden light. Below, airplanes with silver-winged logos rolled off the runway one by one, smooth, steady, and confident, as if the sky itself had been cleansed after a long storm. Angela walked in holding the final report. "Customer satisfaction has reached a record high," she said, "and the Dignity Initiative has expanded to 14 countries. We've just signed an agreement with the Global Aviation Alliance to replicate the model worldwide." Evan nodded, a gentle smile forming on his lips. So it's done. Justice has finally learned how to fly. He stepped out onto the balcony and drew a deep breath. The scent of jet fuel mixed with the salt of the sea, but this time it carried no trace of cold steel. It smelled like hope. In the distance, a plane took off, gliding across the rising sun. Evan watched it, murmuring softly. One day a passenger will sit in seat 1A, and no one will look at him with suspicion. They'll see only a human being like everyone else. Sophia Price approached, camera in hand, her smile warm. "What should I title the final part of my documentary?" she asked. Evan looked up at the sky, his voice calm yet resolute. "Transformation over revenge, when humanity chooses to change instead of retaliate." The camera lingered on the moment he lifted his gaze toward the heavens. A man once forced out of his seat had now taught the world how to sit again, with dignity and grace. From the perspective of a leadership culture expert, Evan Brooks's journey is not just a story about justice, but a testament to the power of humanity in an age defined by power and prejudice. When people choose change over revenge, they not only redeem themselves, but elevate entire systems to a higher plane, where dignity becomes the true standard. If you believe the world needs more people like Evan, click like and subscribe to help spread that message. And before you go, leave a comment with the phrase, "Keep your dignity."